Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the DC Attorney General Candidate Debate. My name is Suhana Rai with the DC Bar Programs team, and I will review a few quick administrative announcements before we get started. On your Zoom toolbar, located at the bottom of your screen, you will find 3 icons, including live transcript, which has been enabled for your viewing ease. For closed captioning, you would click the live transcript option and then click show subtitles. Please note that today's program is being recorded. Any questions and comments that you have should be written by using the Q&A icon, which is also located on your Zoom toolbar. Please write the questions as you think of them. We do have a robust event planned for you tonight, so we would like to note that attendee questions will be addressed towards the end, time permitting. We are also streaming this debate live via YouTube. For those of you who are also viewing it through YouTube, please click on the video thumbnail on your left to view today's debate. You have the option of enlarging your viewing screen, and closed captioning has been provided. Unfortunately, the debate is taking place in the Zoom interface, so we will not be able to take any questions from our YouTube viewing audience only. And with that, I'm very excited to turn the floor over to our very own DC Bar President, Chad Sarchio, to formally kick off tonight's program. Chad, to you.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction, Suhana, and for all of your hard work. First, on behalf of the DC Bar, our DC Affairs community, and our partner, the Anacostia Coordinating Council, I'd just like to issue a warm welcome to everybody who's with us this evening for this important and I'm sure exciting debate in concern with the AG, the Attorney General's race this year. Before we get started in earnest, I just wanted to put in a shameless plug for a really important DC Bar event that's upcoming on June 23rd. We'll have our 2022 DC Bar Conference and 50th anniversary celebration. And we hope just so much that you will be able to join us for that event and with our members from around the world as we come together in person, again, to commemorate 50 years of the bar, celebrate our members and their accomplishments, explore important developments of the law and the future of the legal community in this area. This momentous all-day event will be held live at the Renaissance Washington, D.C. Downtown Hotel again on June 23rd. And it will be, as part of it, we will have our president's reception, which honors our incoming president, Ellen Jakovic, and we'll certainly seek to garner key support for the Pro Bono Center. And this is just an incredibly important event in terms of fundraising and other support for the Pro Bono Center. The night will, as always, be capped off by our annual awards dinner, where you will really hear some impactful work that's been done by some of our members. Of course, as you know, we're here for a debate amongst this year's candidates for Attorney General, and we're just so pleased to be able to host the event. As many of you with us tonight know, this election will see the second elected Attorney General in the city's history. Previously, as you may know, the position was appointed by the mayor, but DC voters approved a charter amendment in 2010, which made the office an elected position beginning in 2015. And this election is just so critical, and the position is so critical when you consider the important issues that the Attorney General has so much to say and administer over. And this includes issues of juvenile justice, civil enforcement topics, and so many others, many of which I'm sure we'll discuss this evening, or we'll hear the candidates discuss this evening. There will hopefully be opportunity for some questions, including those from students from the Thurgood Marshall Academy and Public Charter School, which we're really looking forward to. But without further ado, again, I'd just like to say a particular thanks to all of the candidates who are with us this evening: Ryan Jones, Brian Schwab, and Bruce Spiva, and especially also to our moderators, Washington Post reporter Keith Alexander and WJLA TV journalist Sam Ford. It's my pleasure at this time, however, to turn the meeting over, the events over to Jim Bubar, who is just one of our fabulous former co-chairs of the DC Affairs Community and member of the Communities Committee with the DC Bar, for some important further remarks. So without further ado, over to you, Jim. Thanks.
Jim, you're on mute. And Ryan, if you could turn your camera off, that would be great as well. Thank you.
Okay, am I okay now?
You're great now, thanks.
All right, I am not a cat. Good evening, and thank you, Chad, for your remarks. I've enjoyed working with you this year. I'm Jim Bubar. I'm a former 5-term co-chair of the DC Affairs Community and a current member of the committee which serves the bar's 21 communities. I want to welcome everyone to this forum, but first I want to say a few words about the DC Affairs Community, which has long been recognized for its special expertise over home rule issues. In addition to organizing forums like this one, which gives our members and the public an opportunity to hear from candidates for public office, the community has filed amicus briefs before the Supreme Court on voting rights. It's submitted testimony to the House and Senate on statehood, and it's held programs on guns and home rule, environmental justice, housing affordability, and other issues critical to DC residents. While many may not know this, more than 20 years ago, this community was working on creating a locally elected office of the Attorney General. It supported a resolution that was co-introduced by Council Member David Catania and all of the members of the council, which would have established a locally elected office of the Attorney General. Our thanks to bar staff, organizers, journalists, students, members of the community and the steering committee, and especially Ann Wilcox, Austin Ownby, Claudia McCoyne for your help with this program. We hope you will all join us for our 14th annual Meet the Press program on June 2nd, featuring Tom Sherwood and other members of the local media. Let me now introduce Lamont Mitchell, board chair of the Anacostia Coordinating Council, which is co-sponsoring this forum. He will introduce the moderators and the candidates. You can also find out more about the candidates on their websites, which we are now posting into the chat. Thank you all for attending this evening. Lamont, welcome.
Thank you very much. We are happy. I'm Lamont Mitchell, Chair ACC, and let me just say we're ecstatic to co-sponsor this event, this very, very important event. But let me first start off by congratulating the DC Bar on its 50th year of service and dedication to the Washington community and all the things you do. And a special thanks to Philip Pinnell, our executive director, and Ann Wilcox, who came together and made this thing happen for us. It was Phil Pinnell's idea, and he said, you know, I'm going to take it to the bar, and we appreciate everything the bar has done to make this just a tremendous access. One of the things with ACC is that we believe in bringing information to the people to make informed decisions, and there's nothing more timely than the AG's race this time around. And we have a great panel of moderators who's going to lead us through this discussion. And hopefully we'll come out with some answers and make some decisions on who we support this particular year. We have representing ACC, our General Counsel, Kimmy Morton. We have from the Washington Post, Keith Alexander, and Sam Ford from WJLA Television, who is a really good friend of mine for the past 40 years. And we're happy to have him here to do it. So without further ado, we will introduce Sam Ford and begin the debate. Thank you.
Okay, Lamont, thank you. And I was thinking the same thing. We've known each other about 40 years, which is, I don't know, that too long. So we are going to talk to the candidates, and the candidates are Mr. Spivak and Mr. Schwab and Mr. Ryan. And so anyway, the candidates there, and I don't see them here, but I guess they will appear. One thing I do want to bring up, we're not going to see a candidate named Kenyon McDuffie. And I just like to start off by asking the other candidates whether they think that the AG qualification should be clarified by the DC Council and how they would define an active lawyer.
And Sam, which candidate would you like to answer the question first? If you could indicate it, that would be great.
Okay, I'll start with Mr. Spivak.
And Bruce, if you could unmute yourself. I'm sorry, your time will start over. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I do not believe that the qualifications that the council passed and that the people ratified really that set forth minimum qualifications to serve as the district's chief legal officer need to be clarified or changed. I, as all know, brought a challenge to the council member's legal qualifications. As I said, he's a dedicated public servant, and the Board of Elections and unanimous Court of Appeals agreed with our reading of the law. So there's not really anything to be clarified, and the qualifications are minimal qualifications, which I think the council and the people put in place for a reason.
Mr. Schwab.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ford, and thank you to everybody. I'm sorry I missed you the other night, but it's nice to be with everybody tonight. Look, I think that politics, unfortunately, is a divisive sport too often. And I just felt like the challenge to the council members' qualifications, regardless of the legalities of what might be made and the arguments could be made, was divisive. And our city has so many challenges right now that adding to the divisiveness is not productive. I think we should be having a conversation with the voters about what the AG's office does. It's got a massive portfolio of obligations, really 3 prongs of work: the legal work that gets done every day, the juvenile justice obligations, as well as the public interest. And I think we should be focusing on that and talking about what the qualifications each of us bring to the voters.
Okay, Mr. Jones.
I have no comment on this. This is a very unfortunate circumstance. I think what's been resolved has been resolved, and we need to pick up and move forward and do what's best for the district residents with the qualified candidates that you have before us today.
Okay, well, I'll stay with you, Mr. Jones, since you wouldn't answer that question, so maybe you'll answer this one. The big issue right now is whether Roe v. Wade will continue to exist. And what influence, what authority, what suggestion can you come up with as to how the DC Attorney General deals with this situation, given that the US Congress, with a vote, can make abortion illegal in DC?
Number one thing we need to do is use our courts. This is not a fight that has been new. And so we've used our courts before to get the passing of Roe v. Wade and having that due process rule interpreted in a way to protect privacy in women's decision and to have their choice. I believe that this is a fight that is not going to end. We'll have to go back into the courts, and we can join fights with other attorneys general around the country to make sure that women do have the right to choose. And so that's one step. Another step will be trying to act as a chief lobbyist to other legislative bodies to protect a woman's right to choose. And that's what I see as the Attorney General's role here in the district moving forward.
Mr. Spiva.
Yes, I think this unfortunate circumstance that we find ourselves in as a country just highlights the imperative of statehood. For many years, for decades, the Congress has and used and often overridden our laws and used us as their own petri dish. Often Southern senators, going back to Jim Crow days, imposing segregation on the district, and in more recent years, interfering with our public health measures. We must all engage in this fight for statehood so that we have full local autonomy over our own affairs. B, we must now, while there is still democratic control of the Congress, seek a measure that would protect our abortion laws so that if, as appears to be the case, the worst comes, we have some protection the next time there's unified Republican control.
Mr. Schwab.
Well, the leaked opinion is infuriating on so many levels. I'm the father of 3 daughters. The thought that we are going to criminalize a woman's need or desire to have an abortion is infuriating. And the cascade of other arguments, who we get to marry, who we get to be intimate with, whether we're able to use contraception, it is infuriating. But Mr. Ford, I don't accept the argument that Congress can take that right away from us should it become a hostile Congress. And as AG, I'm going to fight the notion that Congress has the authority to do that. We're going to raise every possible argument, legal, statutory, regulatory, and constitutional. We're going to align ourselves with other state AGs to make sure that we're addressing some of the interstate issues that are going to be arising. And we're going to work with our mayor and city council to make sure that we're putting the best laws in place and policies in place to make sure that any woman who needs or wants an abortion can get one safely in our city.
Okay, I'm going to turn to another issue that's interesting. To a degree, there seems to be a rivalry between the mayor and the attorney general, particularly this mayor and this attorney general. And I don't know, maybe it's something that's, comes with the office. However, when looking at the issue of carjackings, the mayor was pointing fingers at the attorney general for basically not doing his job. The attorney general was pointing fingers at the mayor and the chief for not arresting more people than they've arrested in this thing. So the relationship, at least as I perceive it, has not been that good. So, Mr. Schwab, let's assume that Mayor Bowser is reelected. Do you see any improved relationship with the mayor? And if so, how would you do that?
Well, look, I think that whoever wins our mayoral race, the next AG needs to reset the relationship. I agree that none of us as taxpayers and citizens in the city are well served when the AG and the mayor's office are squabbling with each other. And there's enough blame to go around, and I'm not pointing fingers at who's responsible. But I do think we have to reset the relationship, and I can and will do that by working collaboratively with the mayor, whoever it is, the agencies, doing the hard work that lawyers do day in and day out in terms of providing good advice and defense. But we need to have an independent AG too, and one that makes sure our government is held accountable to the public trust we all put in it when we elect people. We all deserve a government that works. And I do want to come back to some of the media surrounding crime. I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But I do think that sometimes we hyper politicize, and the media plays a role in this, Mr. Ford, in terms of not addressing what the real data is around juvenile crime and crime generally.
Okay. Mr. Spiva.
Yes, I've said from the beginning of this process that one of my primary goals would be to take down the temperature between the AG and the mayor, whoever the mayor may be next year. It's not good for the city to have the mayor and the AG pointing fingers at each other for the challenges that we faced. And that goes beyond crime. I mean, that goes to the housing justice issue. It goes to workers' rights and consumer protection. These are challenging, multifaceted problems. The solutions to these problems don't reside under any one roof in terms of the agencies of the District of Columbia. And it's best if we seek a relationship of cooperation and partnership, if at all possible.
Ryan Jones.
Yes, thank you. We're in a desperate time for change, and we're in a desperate time to see things repair itself. And if Mayor Bowser is elected, I will work tirelessly with her to make sure we're resolving these problems. That's working with the Metropolitan Police Department, that's working with the mayor's office, her legal staff, and repairing the relationship so that we can use our combined forces to stem these carjackings, stem other criminal elements that we keep seeing over and over again. I think it's crucial that we have leadership that works collaboratively, and I will do that. We might have to compromise on a few of our personal desires. However, it's necessary in order to create a result that we all need. We want safer streets, and I will work tirelessly to do that with whoever is the mayor.
Okay, well, thank you. You know, the Attorney General's job is to basically prosecute juvenile crime. And Keith Alexander of the Washington Post, I understand, has worked on a number of questions that he would like to ask you all about that. Keith.
All right. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Let's go right into a couple of questions. Sam, thank you very much for that introduction here. So let's go right into crime real quick here. I talked to several former prosecutors within the OAG's office, and one of the biggest sources of frustration for these former prosecutors is really the DC Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, DYRS, right? This is the organization where juveniles who are charged as juveniles in crimes, this is where they are sent to be rehabilitated and what have you. But what I'm told by these former prosecutors is that the main source of frustration is that these young people are released from DYRS long before the prosecutors think they should be released, or even the judge, or even the victims in this case. So my question to you, to each of you, is what, if anything, can you do with DYRS or even the city laws whereby DYRS should actually hold these young people in custody a lot longer, even based on what the judge says, or even what prosecutors suggest? What can be done through the OAG's office to see that juveniles who are sent to DYRS spend a good amount of time there, as opposed to being released whenever DYRS says they should be released? And I will start with Mr. Jones. We'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. My thought initially is this: if we have a restorative justice program that works and helps reduce some of the stress that's on our legal system, taking it as it is, having judges that are, we don't have judges in current seats right now. We need to have our administration of the youth that come through the system processed in a different way. We need to have them booked. We need to have them on a track where they can rehabilitate, even if they're doing so at home, and even if they're doing so with oversight, such as having some sort of home device that monitors what's happening with them. We have to start ramping up and meeting our citizens where they are and where we need it the most, because we're balancing harms with when we are punishing or rehabilitating our youth with the safety of the residents who are at effect to some of their poor performance. So as Attorney General, I will work tirelessly to make sure that we start to heal some of the issues in our administrative process.
Okay, Mr. Spiva, and again, if we could also focus on DYRS as well, since DYRS is the facility that holds and supposed to, holds these houses, these young people after they've been convicted of a crime. So, Mr. Spiva, we go to you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. I think it, though, emphasizes the danger of setting policy based on anecdote. I understand that there are a few folks who were there who have expressed this as their opinion, but the recidivism rate from the New Horizons facility is actually quite low. The goal of the juvenile justice system is restorative, rehabilitative. And so they're released when the judgment of the facility is such that they believe that they're ready to successfully, go back into the community. And their track record right now is very good. That's not to say it can't be improved. That's not to say that we shouldn't be doing everything we can when our young people are returned home to make sure that we're doing the types of things we should have been doing all along, making sure they have appropriate mental health counseling services, substance abuse counseling, a better educational system. These are the types of things that we need to be providing to keep our juveniles out of the system in the first place. We've failed them when they get involved. And so I wouldn't change policy based on a few opinions of a few individuals. I'd want to see the data and the statistics before doing that.
Mr. Schwab?
Well, thank you for the question. I think we always need to remember when we're talking about juvenile justice that we're talking about kids. We're talking mostly about adolescents whose brains are developing, who are individuating from their parents. That's part of being an adolescent, is taking risks, pushing boundaries, sometimes making mistakes. And our juvenile justice system too often forgets that we're talking about kids, and too often, particularly Black young men, are considered to be adults before they really are adults. And we treat them as adults when they really are children. DYRS plays a critical role when we talk about rehabilitation. And when we do get to the point where certain young people do need to be committed and taken away from their community for a timeout, to get away from the behavior and the community that they're in, we are entrusting them to DYRS to do the hard work of rehabilitation. We've got to give the resources to young people when they're facing consequences, whether it's deep mental health and cognitive behavioral therapy, whether it's life skills and work skills. We need to make sure that DYRS is doing its job. And as AG, there's a communicative and collaborative process, and it's also holding DYRS accountable to make sure that it does its job as an agency of the city.
All right, thank you very much. Now, we also have a question here from Mr. Bob Spagnoletti, excuse me. He's the DC Bar Association Bar Director. And so he takes priority with some of these questions. So we're gonna go right to his question right now. Law school deans across the country and local law firms have expressed outrage and concern about the decision of the DC Court of Appeals Committee on Admissions to limit the number of bar exam test takers to 1,000 this July. That 1,000 number is about half of those who typically register for the summer bar exam. Moreover, priority registration will be given to recent graduates of DC-based law schools and even George Mason's Law School. This means that many law school graduates with legal jobs waiting for them in DC will not be able to take the bar exam here. As the chief district government lawyer, what steps would you take as Attorney General to help address this issue? We understand that there is sufficient space at the convention center, but that Events DC has not agreed to make that space available. So what exactly, if you were elected, what could you do to help address this issue? And we're going to start with Mr. Shaw.
Well, thank you, Mr. Alexander. And Mr. Spagnoletti played the role of the Attorney General in our office before to great esteem, so he may know the answer to this. I confess I don't. I think that, like any other issue that the AG confronts, there are probably multiple strong arguments on both sides of this. Obviously, I suspect the reservation on numbers is health related. And can we safely put people who are taking tests into close proximity with one another for physical taking of the test? I'd want to understand a lot more about the competing issues on both sides before I weighed in. But the general premise that we need to let our law school graduates take the bar, pass the bar, and become practicing lawyers in our city is unassailable. That needs to happen and should happen. And if we can find creative remedies to deal with the health risk or other risks that are animating this limit, I think we got to use all of our brain power to try to address that problem. But candidly, I don't know the arguments on both sides well enough to give you or President Spagnoletti a good answer to that.
Very well. Mrs. Paiva.
My answer is going to be pretty similar to Attorney Schwab's. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think that the DC Attorney General has the ability to require a certain number be allowed. But I also agree that it's very important, obviously, that people have access to the exam so that they can actually practice law, particularly with students like I did, coming out with very high student debts that they need to start working to pay off. And so certainly whatever influence I had, I would use to try to see if we could get more people in to the convention center safely, or maybe look at trying to give a second sitting so that more people could take the exam, so that everybody who wants to take the exam in this time period can do so. I'm in favor of that, but I haven't studied the issue. I'll admit as well.
Okay, very good. And Mr. Jones.
I, like my colleagues, share the sentiment of not being well versed in this issue. However, the DC Court of Appeals regulates the practice of law in the District of Columbia, and we should defer to that our high court. They're in the best position to know. Obviously, there's some health considerations as well, and I'm pretty sure this would encourage students to go and take another bar exam and then waive in to DC. And I know that that's an extensive and tedious process, but maybe we can expedite it on the other side of our young folks coming into the profession, passing another bar and waiving in more expeditiously to try to curb or offset the harsh effects of the limitation being put on test takers due to the raging coronavirus. And I think this also leads us to the question of how do we update our process of examining people being admitted to the bar? Can we do it remotely? How are we going to update the system so that we can make it more practical and we don't have to run into this issue in the future?
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Again, that question came from a former AG himself, so maybe he can know a little bit more information. He might work with you all once you if you get elected. So thank you very much, Mr. Spagnoletti, for that question. Question for you all. Another question here: if you could identify and name 3 current policies, practices, or procedures within the OAG that, in your opinion, should be eliminated, changed, or tweaked. Again, I would like you to identify 3 policies, practices, or procedures currently going on within the OAG that, in your opinion, should either be eliminated, changed, or tweaked, and why. And Mrs. Paiva, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. I, again, as I alluded earlier, would want to seek to have a more cooperative relationship with the mayor's office, and that affects all policies and procedures, both in the Attorney General's office and things outside of the Attorney General's office that affect the AG's work. So that's one. It's not really a practice, policy, or procedure, but it's certainly an area that impacts a lot. Secondly, I think the child support function could be improved. It's such an important function for the city, and so that would be a high priority for me. Third, I think that we could better coordinate some of the very good programs that have been put in place, like the violence interruption program. But the mayor's office has a violence interruption program, and it's under an agency under the mayor, and the AG's office also has a violence interruption program. And the Criminal Justice Reform Institute has said that we are resource rich, but coordination poor in that area. And so I would seek to improve coordination in that area.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Jones.
Yes. So there are the 3 things. One, I want to continue to expand public advocacy. We want to have measurable statistics on the Cure the Streets program. We want to enhance it better. We want to remove the redundancy it may have with the one's office of the mayor and have it work together and more seamlessly, and hopefully have it be more effective. We also look at the legislative function of OAG as an independent agency. what are we going to be, what laws are we putting on the books? What regulations can we put on the books to have our office operate a bit more seamlessly? And also looking at the land use unit to better address affordable housing.
Okay, all right. And Mrs. Spiva.
I've already had my shot at that one, but I don't know if you want Brian to take a shot.
Sorry, Mrs. Swab. Yeah.
Bruce's answer was so good. I thought you were going back for more. I think there are three things that I'd like to focus on. First, I think the community engagement aspect of the AG's office needs to be bolstered. I think the AG needs to be physically present in communities across our city, ideally using some of the technology that might access the courts and one another more fluidly. We've learned a lot through the pandemic about using technology to increase access. And I think having the AG in the neighborhoods physically, both listening directly to community members about what's on their minds, pushing education and issues out into the community, alerting people to issues and trends is important. I think the AG should lean into business, particularly small businesses and entrepreneurs, because there are a lot of barriers to entry for a lot of our small, typically Black-owned businesses where people are paying higher prices for credit, for insurance, and other things that are preventing people from building wealth in building business and home ownership. There's also a lot of issues about procurement and contracting in our city that I think the next AG should lean into. Finally, I think we've got to be much more aggressive on traffic violence. Some of the law enforcement around traffic and traffic accidents, there is a jurisdiction and a criminal prosecutorial role for the AG. We can't prosecute our way out of it, but I think we can be more aggressive, both in terms of holding DUI and reckless drivers accountable and doing some convening. I'd also like to see us work on a reciprocity arrangement with Maryland and Virginia, where some of the people who speed through our city who live in Maryland and Virginia pay the same kind of fines and tickets that people who live here in DC get ticketed and pay.
All right, very good, very good. Thank you for that. My final question before I turn over to our next moderator. DFS, Department of Forensic Sciences, over a year now without accreditation and without a director. Matter of fact, this office is now on its second director that was put out in recent years. So my question to you, if you were to become Attorney General, what should or could be done with DFS so that it is an independent entity, but also it's credible, handling DNA evidence, guns that are found, and doing gun information evidence. What should be done with DFS that is not being done, that has caused this entity to lose its accreditation? And we will start with Mr. Jones.
Thank you. This is incredible to the work that we do. It's crucial to the work that we do. As prosecutors of juvenile offenses and adult misdemeanors, as they may have an impact on drug offenses or gun offenses. So we need that agency up and running and accredited. So we're going to make recommendations. We're going to work with other professionals who would best know. And from the outside looking in, I have to get my hands around it in the space so I can best advise. So as attorneys, we operate with the facts that we have in front of us. I don't have all the facts. I don't know what's slowing us all down. But when I get in that office, it's going to be full speed ahead, making sure that we're able to exact justice where it belongs so that we can keep people safe.
All right. Mrs. Spiva.
Yes, I think this is critically important, not only to have a functioning prosecutorial system and in terms of being able to actually prosecute people who are guilty, but what really keeps me up at night is how many people have gone to jail based on evidence that's not credible because of the problems that they've had at the forensic lab. Very troubling. It's clear that new leadership is needed and that there needs to be an overhaul. I don't have all the facts at hand in terms of what the problem is, what is causing the problem, but certainly a thorough top to bottom overhaul is needed. The current AG, I think, made the decision no longer to defend the agency, and I can understand the frustration with the failure to correct past problems. But there is a cost to that because you do lose your seat at the table as a counselor for the agency. And so that's something that I would do only as a very last resort, because I would want to try to use the influence I had as the lawyer for the agency to try to get them to make it right. And so that would be my approach.
All right, and Mr. Schwab.
Well, thank you. You know, coming in from my perspective, results matter. This is another issue about where we as taxpayers and citizens deserve a government that works. I think we've got a problem and have had a systemic problem in some of our agencies, and including at DFS, with insisting on a culture of integrity, insisting on a culture of independence and excellence, and making sure that the hard work gets done every day. And part of being the AG is holding our agencies accountable. We have to work as lawyers and counselors to build levels of trust with the agency, the counsel in the agencies, to identify where there are root problems in the agencies and address them. I talk about accountability a lot, and it's throughout my platform. Part of what the AG does, if he's doing his job well, is making sure our government is held accountable to the sacred trust it holds. And when we're talking about forensic evidence that might exculpate somebody who is wrongly charged with a crime, particularly a young person who might be facing some kind of consequence because the evidence is tainted, that's unacceptable. There can be no more important work that our government does. And so we have to insist on a level of integrity and excellence and transparency, building that into the culture of everything we do as elected officials in the District of Columbia.
Okay, all right. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And now we're going to send it over to another moderator, Ms. Kimmy Morton.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kimmy Morton, and I'm happy to be here to represent ACC as its general counsel. My first question is about the new jail that people are talking about. I'm also the president of the Bellevue Neighborhood Civic Association, and there's been talk of a new jail coming to Washington, D.C. Of course, there's a reason that we need to bring our prisoners back home. Many of them are scattered across the country, along with our juvenile offenders. I'd like to hear from each one of you what your position is on, number one, whether we should build a new jail in DC. If so, where that DC jail should be built. And I'd like to start with Mr. Schwab.
Well, thank you, Ms. Morton. Look, the deplorable conditions of our jail are really a stain on our city and have been for a lot of years. And what I think is maybe most egregious about that is it took, unfortunately, the arrest and incarceration of white supremacists who invaded our city on January 6th and who were locked up in that jail to bring the issue to the forefront again. There is a very comprehensive report from the Jails and Justice Task Force. It was facilitated by the Council for Court Excellence, on which I've been a board member and executive committee member for a lot of years. And that task force has laid out 80 specific concrete steps to deal with lowering the level of incarceration and thinking about returning citizens and making sure we're giving returning citizens the resources they need. And in addition to that, they talk specifically about the design and location of a new jail, a smaller facility, one that's much more humane. And I would lean into those recommendations because the experts spent a lot of time working on those specific concrete suggestions.
Okay. Mr. Spiva.
Thank you. Mr. Schwab almost literally took the words out of my mouth. I do think it's outrageous that it took until the January 6th protesters were in the DC jail for it finally the awful conditions to be recognized. And I too agree that we need to implement the recommendations of the Commission on Jails. I also sense, though, in the question that this also might partly relate to folks who are convicted of felonies by the U.S. Attorney prosecution who are being sent around the country to prisons, far and wide, because we don't any longer have our own prison facility in D.C. or near D.C. as it used to be with the old Lorton facility. And I think we do need to do something about that as well, because it's terrible for families to not have the ability to visit their loved ones who are incarcerated in those facilities.
And Mr. Jones.
Yes, thank you. I've heard recently from a council member or a potential council member suggesting that there should be a DC jail right downtown, right in the heart of what we consider our, judicial square. And so we could build up a new jail right down with underground tunnels that can transport prisoners to the various courts that they need to go, federal court, DC Superior Court, if there's any administrative matters. It becomes more functional. And when we're looking at how we're designing our city in a future of professional work, how much are we going to be downtown? Are more professionals going to be remote? And will it be more practical if we do have that central vein downtown in our judiciary square jurisdiction? I look at what we've done with how we treat our prisoners in the past, and it was a part of my platform to ensure that our young folks and our adult residents that get shipped off are close enough so that they can rehabilitate better. And this would allow, that location would allow us to do just that.
And thank you. I have another question for all of you. I've been working along with Philip Pinnell and others, Lamont Mitchell in Ward 8, which, as you know, has the largest number of young people in the city of any ward. And since, as Attorney General, your primary responsibility will be prosecuting juvenile offenders, and I'd like to start with you with this question, Mr. Jones, so you can think about it. What experience do you have in working with juveniles? What qualifications do you have in advocating for juveniles, especially minority juveniles and juveniles living east of the Anacostia River, that you will bring to your job if you're elected our next Attorney General?
I have lived experience.
Mr. Jones?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have lived experience as a native Washingtonian growing up with folks who were in the system early. I decided to become a lawyer in order to give back to my community. Charles Hamilton Houston famously said, if you're a Black attorney, you're going to be a social engineer or parasite. And I want nothing more than to defend and help young folks with my skill set. However, I've never prosecuted juveniles. I only would have to defer and surround myself with other experts in the field who I know currently work there. And I would defer to them on what's best. I know one particular person who's experienced not only being a prosecutor, but being jailed, and recognizes that we need to have better protocol, a better system, and reform our justice system to better rehabilitate. And we're going to put those experts in place so that we rewire the system to empower young folks, to give them a real chance to be meaningful contributors to society after making a mistake.
I'd like to follow up with you on this, and that is, would you consider implementing an internship program at the Office of Attorney General that would hire minority DC youth, for example, to work there during the summer to get experience?
Absolutely. So my campaign team, we talk about putting in not just summer job programs, but something that's year round, extending after school programs, getting folks involved before things happen, giving people meaningful things to do. You know, we watched the success of that in the past, and we need to also ramp up from a scholarship program that takes people from not only high school to college, to law school, and into the Office of Attorney General as working attorneys. We have to show people a better way for them to live a better way. And that's what you've highlighted is something that we would do.
Thank you. Mr. Spiva, the same question for you.
Well, it begins with the fact that I'm a father of two now young men, young Black men that I've raised in the city. And like Mr. Jones, I also have my own lived experience, and I have tutored young people. In fact, I was pleased to see that the Thurgood Marshall students are going to be asking us questions, because I tutored at that school actually for many years ago. And I see in our young people, because I don't think of my job as primarily as AG as a prosecutor of young people. When I see these people, I see my sons and my what would have been my daughters if I had daughters. I see myself. I see my family members. And so I don't see them as young people who need to be punished or harshly dealt with. I see them as people who need love and care and the type of support that so many in other parts of our city take for granted. I think they deserve the best, just as my children did, and just as children all over this city get. And so that's what I'll be about as Attorney General.
Thank you. Mr. Schwab.
Well, I think I share Mr. Spiva's view that I wouldn't characterize the chief job of the AG to be a prosecutor of kids. I think that we need to invest in young people. The future of our city and our country is in young people's hands. And I have had the great privilege of being on the scholarship committee and the mentoring committee at the Abramson Scholarship Foundation for many, many years, serving great young scholars from Ward 8 and Ward 7 and from all over our city, making huge, huge impact already as alums of the program. I have a mentee, Deontay, who when he was 15 years old was shot. He was shot in the neck and he was paralyzed for close to 18 months. He's about to graduate from Morehouse with a degree in business this Sunday. And I learned more from Deontay than I'm sure I ever share with him. And I listen to the way he approaches the challenges of his life and how blessed he feels he is now today and what he's learned. As AG, I've got to do a lot of listening, but I got to bring a perspective in a leadership position, which is we need to serve our kids, remember their kids, recognize that kids make mistakes, particularly teenagers, and they need room to make mistakes and be safe in that and to have second chances and resources around them. To answer your question about internships, absolutely. I think that there should be ongoing outreach from the AG's office year-round to our high school students. We have currently a high school council, an advisory council to the AG, which I would continue. I would be leaning into moot court and trial advocacy work where young people can start to see, do they want to be lawyers? One of the great things about being a young person and seeing that you can be a lawyer is you start to channel your passion for history, for reading. And we know teenagers are argumentative. So if we can channel that into being advocates, it's a good thing. There are a lot of opportunities for young people to be engaged in the AG's office under my leadership. And I would certainly be continuing a lot of those great programs that are in place already.
Great. Thank you so much for your answer. At this point, we are very, very honored to have two young people with us. Both of them are students at the Thurgood Marshall Academy and Public Charter School. And I'd like to introduce our first student, and she's going to ask a question. Her name is Sierra James. Ms. James.
Good evening. My name is Sierra James. I am a senior at Thurgood Marshall, and I have one question for all the candidates. So, Attorney General Racine believes that for truancy, it is not necessary to prosecute a truant student until after social support and school efforts have failed. What is your take on this issue, and how will your office curb truancy? Now, I would like the candidates to respond in this order. First, candidate Jones, then candidate Spiva, and last but not least, candidate Schwab.
Hi, Sierra, how are you? Thank you for the question. My thought is this: I don't want to see people being prosecuted for truancy at all. I think we're entering into a space where we can learn remotely. I think when we start opening up other auxiliary sites and expanding how we educate children who need and creating individualized lesson plans, we start to tailor fit our curriculum to how students need it the most. And that way we start to stem those problems, and we're not looking for excuses to put people into the margins of society. And this helps break the school to prison pipeline. And so I want to look at creative solutions to cure old problems. And this is one of those things. These were awful excuses to put people behind bars and give people a dwindled chance at being successful in life. And this is a process that I want to see ended now.
Okay, I like that.
Hey, Sierra, thanks for the question. I'm with Attorney Jones on this. I don't believe that we should be putting kids in jail for truancy. I think we should do all within our powers, whether it's in our job description or not, because I think it's every elected official's and every adult's job description to try to keep our kids in school, not only for their future, but one of the highest predictors of kids getting into trouble is high rates of truancy. And so I would try to continue and even expand the programs that the AG's office has to try to encourage kids to stay in school. I know sometimes adults are responsible or lack responsibility for keeping their kids in school. And so I'd want to address that. Again, I think jail is probably the last thing I would want to think about, but we also don't want to leave our young people unsupported and alone if they've got an irresponsible parent who's not doing their part to keep them in class. Thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
Hi, Sierra. I don't feel last or least, but thank you. And not surprising, I've had the great fortune of working with some of your colleagues and previous scholars from Thurgood Marshall at Abramson. And I love your question. It reflects the fact that the school is dedicated to using the law and legal principles to engage in democracy. So I think when young people are falling out of school, it's a warning sign. The connectivity to school is such a safety measure for kids being healthy and moving on a path towards prosperity and promise. So when kids are truant and falling out, I think of it as a warning sign, and the AG's office should be proactive in dealing with young people that are starting to signal that they may be getting into trouble. I don't think we incarcerate kids when they're getting into trouble like that. We give them resources. And we got to ask the question we don't ask enough, which is, why is this happening? Why is a young person starting to not come to school? Are they having housing instability or food instability? Are they taking care of younger siblings? What's going on so that we can address the root causes and give kids the resources they need? Punishing kids on the theory that they're doing something wrong because they're not coming to school is the wrong starting point. Let's think about how we help our kids, get them reconnected to school, and hopefully go on to be college if that's what's right for them, or vocational education if that's right for them, but something that's going to make them passionate, happy, and hopeful.
Thank you. Thank all of you for answering my question.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sierra, for joining us this evening. Our next student is Boulay Bamali. Mr. Bamali.
Thank you, Ms. Morton. And my question is for all the candidates, starting with candidate Spiver. Recently, there's been a rise of gun violence in school and around school. What resources your office would enact to ensure that students are safe in school and going to school?
Thanks so much, Buhali, for the question. I think that this is a very serious problem, and I have certainly, as a father of two now young men who went to school, and one of them still does here in the district. I've felt the fears of that potential violence myself. And so I think we've got to go after ghost gun manufacturers that are partly responsible for flooding our city with illegal guns. I think that there's got to be accountability, of course, if a young person has a gun, but we also need to be providing the types of services that we've been talking about to try to keep our young people out of that kind of trouble to begin with, the kinds of mental health counseling, fighting housing instability, making sure that they're being provided a robust educational opportunity. All of these things we've learned again and again are really at the root of these problems, and we need to address these to fully make our kids safe.
Thank you, Mr. Spiver. Mr. Jones?
Boulay, how are you? Thank you for the question. I have a more broad look at it. One, there's safe passage. I want to infuse more resources there so young folks know that they have a safe way to get to and from school. There's an interesting thing when we're hiring police officers. I would like them to be DC residents. I want to find more of them being DC residents so that they're more connected to the neighborhoods that they are policing. And when I was growing up, more police officers lived in DC. So there'd be police cruisers parked on various streets around DC, and they act as a deterrent to poor behavior. We're looking at numbers that rival in 2022 numbers that I was growing up with a much different demographic. And the guns are getting are too easily accessible. And so, you know, police functions, we want it to reform. We want police to act better with the residents that they're supposed to protect. And so if we can start changing culture in that way and start creating a better relationship between students, officers, resource officers, people providing safe passage, I think we start to eliminate some of the gun problem. I remember kids having to use clear backpacks so that they couldn't conceal weapons so easily. You know, there are some old methods that work, and we may have to revisit those. And, you know, having those metal detectors, you know, and making sure that young folks don't have access to weapons because they're being passed around via text message saying you can get it from here. You know, we have to be more involved. We can't be hands off. This is a critical and crucial time. We have to meet young folks where they need it the most. And we're going to have to ask you young folks to step up. You know, there's some young folks doing something wrong, you know, protect everybody. You know, don't feel like it's snitching. You got to look at it and think you're trying to keep somebody safe and give them a real opportunity on both sides of the gun.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Schwab.
Well, Boulay, thank you. Another really good, hard question from Thurgood Marshall. So, man, it's hard enough to learn when you're in high school. I mean, you're taking hard classes, you're studying, you've got your AP classes and your tests. You're tired because as you're a teenager, you're probably doing a lot of different activities and your body's growing. And if you are scared when you're in school that you're going to get hurt, you can't learn. It makes it almost impossible to learn when people are scared in school. We got to recognize that. A lot of kids have guns because they're scared. They're carrying guns because they're protecting themselves. And guns are too plentiful in our city. I do not think we can arrest and prosecute our way out of guns possession. I'll tell you, I wish it was different, but we can't. There are too many guns. It would completely clog the system. We need to make sure we keep kids away from guns because the supply is there. So how do we really focus on keeping kids away from guns? I think we got to listen to kids. I bet you have, and your colleagues have some really good answers to how you would feel safer in school, why you feel like there could be some steps taken to affect how much gun and gun possession is swirling around schools. I think we invest in things like alternative dispute resolution and restorative justice. We start reimagining what it means for young people to use their words to resolve disagreement rather than using guns. We create a culture of excellence in schools where people are not resorting to fighting with each other and beefing with each other by weaponry or fists, but by using their words, and we channel the energy in positive places. I think it sends a terrible message to a young person to have to go through a metal detector every day and to feel like you're a suspect in your own school when all you're trying to do is show up, stay engaged, hang out with your friends, get good grades, and hopefully get through and graduate. So those are some of my initial thoughts about what do we do about guns around schools.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab.
Well,
Thank you.
And thank you too, Boulay. And so at this point, we get to throw it back. We have some time left. We get to throw it back to our chief moderator, Mr. Sam Ford. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you. And I want to ask some questions here. One that I got was from specifically about your position. I'm going to ask each of you this question. What is your position on fostering principles of restorative justice? And what, if any, model do you feel is most effective? That question was from Kathleen O'Reilly. Start with Mr. Schwab.
I think that we should all be very proud of the fact that the DC Office of Attorney General is the only prosecutor office in the country that has brought restorative justice into the prosecutorial process. recognizing that it, like other diversion programs and other ways of addressing criminal behavior, has shown promise in terms of resolving cases, oftentimes to much better satisfaction of the victims, who are too often silenced, particularly in juvenile criminal cases, and getting to agreement with the people who have perpetrated crimes and the victims on really understanding the empathetic and restorative sort of healing that has to happen ideally in our criminal justice system. I look to expand it. I want to look at the data closely because initial data suggests that it actually is working on stemming recidivism, that perpetrators of crime who engage in restorative justice do not recidivate at the same rate as others. And if that's the case, and I think thus far the data suggests that, I'd look to be expanding that into more and more violent crimes, and particularly crimes where it may not be possible to get a conviction or a commitment based on the evidence. Restorative justice can still be a healthy, productive way of bringing closure to what is a tragedy, both for the victims and candidly the families and the perpetrators too.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Yesterday you asked, or maybe a couple of days ago, you asked, when do you guys ever disagree? When do you guys ever say anything harshly towards one another? We don't. And, you know, Brian, he's heard us these questions answered and he nailed it, right? So I want to build on his question a bit. We recognize that DC has this unique restorative justice program, one that is recognized nationally. You know, I was campaigning the other day and bumped into a senior and she was telling me a story about how she was assaulted in her building. And she said she couldn't get any help and nobody's going to go after this senior who knocked her down and caused her some harm. I think that we're talking about the restorative justice program, not only for juveniles, but adult misdemeanors. And this seems like a perfect scenario for a restorative justice candidate. They would be perfect for that. That means, you know, the senior that knocked her over, assaulted her, they sit down, they come to a table, they agree, and they don't go through extensive process of litigation in their golden years when they're supposed to be, you know, carrying on with civility that we would expect. And I think programs like this, you know, allow people to feel protected, allow people to feel heard. And I would want to just build that out and let more people know that it's available to them so that we can bring justice and people can feel safe in their homes.
Mr. Spiva.
I think that restorative justice has an important place in our justice system. And I think of it as a victim-centered practice that first and foremost, when done correctly, allows for the victim to heal in some sense, or begin the healing process from being a victim of a crime, potentially a traumatic crime. I think also it, when done correctly, the perpetrator actually heals or changes and recognizes the harm that they've done and vows to do better in the future. I think there's some situations where we want to be careful using this model. The domestic violence context comes to mind because there are oftentimes psychological abusive factors there that allow for the behavior to repeat, control over the victim. And so I'd want to be careful in those contexts. But in other contexts, I think it's quite appropriate and can be quite a good system to use.
I'm going to stay with you and ask you a question. You brought up the issue of child support functions. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, first I'll mention that I've got a section on my website about this, and I believe one of my senior advisors is Eric Angel, the former head of the legal aid of DC, and he brought to my attention that this is something that maybe perhaps doesn't work to the extent that it should. We need to make sure, because this is an anti-poverty program in my view, that and this office enforces child support, or is supposed to enforce child support, appropriate child support orders. And that's something that I would want to see done in more cases, but also with a balance that recognizes that dead broke is not the same as dead beat. And so we're not helping anybody if we impose an unreasonable, unrealistic child support order on someone who's lost a job or, for instance, has been sent to prison. So that's what I'm talking about with reforming child support.
Okay. Do either of the others of you would like to, talk about this?
Sure. I'll jump in. I don't like weaponizing child support against our residents. I think it has to be balanced against the needs of the children and the beneficiary of the child support. I recognize that it has been a weapon to put people behind bars, and that doesn't put people in a better position to actually get the job that they need to adhere to the court order to pay a certain amount of money each month. So this is something where we can try to revitalize or put an inflow of money to provide resources or programming to get people out of a rut. And that's what I want to see happen, as opposed to putting folks into a system that doesn't give them a better chance to survive on the other side.
Okay.
I would add simply this, Mr. Ford, because I think my colleagues have hit the high points. Like everything else we do, we need to ask the question of why. Why is a non-custodial parent behind on their child support? And it's not a one-size-fits-all answer for all of them. And our system shouldn't respond in a one-size-fits-all way. There are a lot of custodial moms who are not getting paid. It's often the moms who are custodial and the dads who have obligations to pay, who are in desperate need of the resources, and the dads just aren't paying. And then there are a lot of dads who want to be engaged with their kids and want to provide support, but they're out of work. One concrete thing we can do a better job on is making sure that everybody in the system knows that child support orders can be easily amended when a person's employment changes, when their employment status changes, so that an obligation that was once affordable, when it becomes unaffordable, can be modified without sanction of being in contempt of an order.
So, Mr. Schwab, while I have you, I want to ask you about another thing. As I think about attorneys general, they bring home the bacon. I mean, they go out and they join with other attorneys general to sue people over smoking or whatever it is, and then they bring the money back to DC or Idaho or wherever they are. So what issues out there would you like to, let's say, link up with other attorneys general to let's say benefit DC or at least attack a problem?
Well, that you're right, that there has been a lot of profile about cases where there have been nationwide problems that are affecting DC residents too. And our attorney general has joined. So opioid litigation is a good example, where there were settlements that were brought back to affect people here in our city who were very much damaged by addiction to painkillers. For me as attorney general, it's got to start with our city and our residents. Where are people being harmed by certain practices? If there are national practices that are affecting our citizens, then joining with other state AGs makes sense. But we've got a lot of local issues that I think are important for the AG to lean into on consumer protection. Seniors who are being scammed and defrauded out of their financial being or their homes. We've got price gouging going on with gas prices, and now we're seeing with baby formula. We've got people who are too often being taken advantage of here in DC. And while national cases are important, particularly when they're going to inure to the benefit of those of us who live here, for me, consumer protection also means really focusing on harms to people who live here, unique to DC.
You other gentlemen, would you like to weigh in on this? Either one?
I would. I have been a plaintiff's lawyer for many years, was a class action plaintiff's lawyer litigating national cases, but that often had harms to the residents of DC, have represented classes of DC residents. And so I think the key is are DC residents being harmed by the practice being challenged. I think we could go astray if we look at it as bringing home the bacon, because the appropriate case, it's where the bacon was stolen. So you're getting the bacon back, and then you need to put that money to use, either restore it to the people who it's been taken from, if possible. And there's some cases where that's not feasible, or you need to use the bacon for a public use that best suits the harm, best addresses the harm. I've done that before many times. I've gone after big oil. I've gone after technology companies. And so I can effectively do that. And I can also effectively evaluate the appropriate cases to bring on behalf of the citizens.
Okay.
I'd simply add to that, yes, you want to go out and use litigation as a way to be a money generating function for your government. We talk about data, big data. I think we're talking about cyber security matters that have generated a new market for where people are getting away with fraudulent scams that are taking advantage of people, and we need to get that money back into the hands of DC residents and do it proactively. I think we also need to look at whatever else may be out there. And so I'm excited to get in the courtroom and advocate on behalf of DC residents to try to generate some more income so we can expand public advocacy and take on more fights.
So you didn't like this question before, but I'm gonna throw it out there again. As a voter, you want to know what's the difference between candidate A, B, and C. And so that helps you make up your mind. So I'm asking you, what is the difference between you and either or both of your opponents, other than the fact that your name is Ryan Jones and theirs is something else?
Look, I'm the young gun, right? Me as Attorney General, you're getting a race car. We got a lot of important work to do. I want to be an important cog in the wheel that changes the way the government is working. I look at my colleagues and I have a great deal of respect for them. And I don't want to say anything negative to them because I'm sure that they have sharp skills that they could use in slewing at me. And I don't want that. But, I think we're in need of a new vision. I think we're in need of young folks stepping to the plate to give people a chance to create new solutions to old problems. I think that my counterparts are more than capable of doing the job, and I believe I am as well. And I have a lot to offer with new vision, and I talk about them often. And I have a zeal and a tirelessness and an energy to do what's necessary.
Okay, do either of you gentlemen would like to have something to say about that?
Well, we probably both do.
Okay, you got the floor.
Well, thank you. Look, I agree with Ryan's point that unfortunately, for lots of politics around our country, this race accepted because it's been a very civil and frankly enjoyable experience. It's too divisive, and questions about comparing to other candidates sometimes is a shorthand of being sharp-elbowed, which I don't think is appropriate for politics. I've been trying to make my case directly to the voters about what I bring and what is unique. I'm the only candidate who was at the Department of Justice, who has actually been in a law enforcement role. I was involved in civil enforcement of tax cases all over the country as a young lawyer. I bring 30 plus years of experience trying all kinds of different cases, a wide breadth, certainly some civil rights and plaintiff side cases, but lots of commercial and complex and tax and real estate too. I've led large teams of lawyers, and in our law office, hundreds of lawyers, large budgets, and bring a leadership experience to this job. And I'm independent. I'm a fair election candidate. I'm a first-time candidate, and I'm bringing a rugged independence into this, a fresh eye, to make sure that I can truly hold people accountable, our government accountable, and can bring the lawyering skills and experience and judgment to the job that it requires. And I think those are the factors that our voters can decide on, make the right ingredients for our next Attorney General.
Mr. Spiva, why should the voters choose you over your two opponents?
And I agree. I personally like both of these gentlemen. I would ask that my friend Brian not make us older than we are by saying 30 plus. It's almost 30, Brian. Next month will be 30 since we graduated from law school together.
It feels a lot longer through this campaign. You're right, though.
Amen to that. I have 30 years of fighting for the public interest, fighting for civil rights and voting rights, consumer protection and antitrust enforcement. Fighting for DC statehood. I'm the only candidate who's been arrested fighting for DC statehood, have marched through the streets, have filed briefs in court for our local autonomy. I also have managed the DC office of a large firm, Perkins Coie, and was a member of the governing body of that firm, the executive committee, firm of over 1,200 lawyers and $1.1 billion in revenue. And so I have the management experience combined with the vision born of the experience of walking the talk, and walking the blocks in doing the public interest work that has well prepared me to effectively advance the public interest mission of the office.
Another question from the audience. What can the AG do to prevent repeat of incidents like January 6th? Since you're right there, that's the question for you.
Which you?
The question, and let me just go ahead and read it as it is here. What can an OAG in the future do to avoid and stop a repeat of a January 6th insurrection? That is a question from Ms. Susanna Moreno.
Which one would you like us to address it for?
You're right there.
For me, okay. January 6th was a horrific assault on our democracy, and the assaults have continued. Perhaps not physically yet, but with these with the big lie that the election was stolen. I think that although our powers have constraints, we must do everything in our power to fight and prevent another one. I've brought and litigated Klan Act cases against the Trump campaign and against the RNC for trying to suppress the vote. That's the act under which the current AG is pursuing the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. And so I'm well equipped to take them on civilly. I have said that I think we should have felony prosecution powers, and I certainly, if I had them, I would vigorously pursue those types of insurrectionists who attacked our Capitol. And so those are some of the things that I would do.
The other gentleman, would you like to comment on this?
Absolutely. I started my campaign saying that I thought we needed to bring bad actors such as these to account. And that's why I decided to run. I want to end racism where it is, and I want to, and we can use civil measures to make sure that it becomes expensive to behave in certain types of ways. I want to change culture with the law. And if they know that we're on the front lines of taking on harsh actors for their bad acts, maybe they won't do it again. Maybe they'll understand that there's a new day in this country, knowing that our leaders that sit in the most powerful seats of the law enforcement are going to go after them for those types of acts, and you don't feel comfortable doing it in the future.
Schwab?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, we've all been witness to a rise in our country over the last 5 or 6 years in hate, in white supremacy, in homophobia, anti-Semitism. We're seeing, excuse me, a rollback of civil rights and voting rights, and now reproductive rights happening right before our eyes. And all of that attack on our democracy, unfortunately finds its way here to DC, to the seat of our national democracy. And that's the reality of the United States we're living in right now, a divisive country with lots of threats. I think the Attorney General of our District of Columbia needs to continue to be a voice on the national stage to stand up for what's right, to stand up against hate, to stand up against white supremacy, wherever it bears its head, to stand in alliance with other states who are confronting issues, because we're going to need our allies too, and to take whatever measures. Some are going to be legal, some are going to be political, but always on the side of expressing a view loudly, persuasively, and clearly to everybody who's going to listen, because we're on a national stage, about what acceptable citizenship means in our country today.
Stay right there. I'm going to ask you a question from the audience. Says AG attorneys are typically assigned to perform legal sufficiency review for DC agency transactions or policies. In terms of collaboration with various DC agencies such as DMPED or DHCD and the in-house general counsel of those agencies, do you have a plan to assess what is working and what needs improvement internally at the AG's office? That is from Sarah Markinson-Bussell. Mr. Schwab.
I think that day one, hopefully after day, maybe June 22nd, after the primary is over, I plan to start engaging deeply in the conversations about transition and understanding exactly what some of these on the ground issues are for the line attorneys and the lawyers working in the AG's office. Part of what we need to make sure we do is make sure that the talented lawyers that are in the office now are going to stay, that they know they have a leader committed to their professional success. A lot of the professional success for the line attorneys is counseling and working with the attorneys within the agencies. And some of the agencies are in need of counseling, are in need of leadership themselves. Part of the role of any leader is to listen. And I've always said that my dad gave me great advice when he said, God gives us 2 ears and 1 mouth. The new leader of the AG's office has to very actively listen to the people on the ground who are experiencing what the relationships are and what's working and what isn't working. And hopefully with fresh set of eyes and a commitment to results, because I'm not a politician, I'm a lawyer that's expected and hired to get results. We're going to go in and figure out how we can make some concrete changes for improvement. That's one of the great things a fresh set of eyes brings to any process.
Mr. Jones.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
I will read the question again, but basically it seems, as I interpret the question, it is you have all these agencies in DC have their own lawyers, and the question is, when you are taking on an issue, what are your thoughts? But let me just read the question as it was written to me. Okay, here we go. My glasses. Okay, AG attorneys are to perform legal sufficiency review for DC agency transactions or policies. In terms of collaboration with various DC agencies such as DMPED or DHCD and the in-house general counsel at those agencies, do you have a plan to assess what is working and what needs improvement internally at the AG's office?
Yes. So trying to take the bites out of that question. One, the Office of Attorney General does have oversight when agencies want to promulgate rules, and that's one of our major functions, making sure that the rules that are being promulgated are legally sufficient, they're constitutional, and they're not going to have a desperate impact on a certain demographic within our city. I take that responsibility seriously as I talk about creating a task force that revises, repeals, amends the DC code from statutes to its regulations, criminal and civil. I also talk about having a monthly or quarterly meeting with all agency attorneys so that we're operating in a sound and unified fashion. There are issues that come up over interpreting what a certain word means in a statute, and are we affecting the interpretation in a way that puts our residents in the best position while balancing it against the needs of the district government. And that means you have to work together. That means you have to be in constant communication. And everyone has a job and everyone has a role and a function. And you have to empower your line attorneys, your general counsels to know that they're doing and making the right decisions.
Okay, and finally, Mr. Spiva.
Well, consistent with the theme of greater coordination and collaboration, I would try to form tight relationships with the in-house counsel of the agencies. They used to be part of the AG's office before it went to elected control. And I would want to hear first and foremost from them and from the attorneys, the excellent attorneys in the AG's office about what is working and what isn't. But I would also like to share with them that I think we are all on the same mission, and that's to provide high quality, unbiased legal advice to keep the government on the right track where we think where we think they've done wrong, to advise them to make it right, where we think the policy violates the law, to try to counsel them. Even pressure them if we have to correct that.
Okay.
And so that would be my approach.
So we're going to give you the floor again for a closing statement.
You being me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this forum tonight. A great Washingtonian, Frederick Douglass, said that power concedes nothing without a demand. And I believe that when we see an injustice, we must never walk away. We have a moral obligation to fight, to try to change it. And that's why I entered this race. That's why I want to be your attorney general. I want to wake up every morning thinking about how to use the power of the office, working with the excellent attorneys in the office to make everyday Washingtonians' lives better. And I believe that I will be effective at doing that because that's exactly what I've been doing this last 30 years, fighting for civil rights, fighting for consumer protection and antitrust enforcement, fighting for voting rights, both here and around the country, fighting for DC statehood. These are not issues that just came along for me during this election season. These are things that I've been doing for 30 years. When my clients had no one else to turn to, when other lawyers were too worried about how they get paid to pay them any mind, I was there in their corner, helping them fight to achieve justice. When no one else would hear them, I helped them lift up their voices in court and help them tell their stories. And that's what I want to do as Attorney General for the city. I want to go after slumlords who deliberately push low-income tenants out of their housing. That's something I've done before. I want to fight for the types of things we've been talking about around juvenile justice. I want to fight for environmental justice.
Okay.
And those are the types of things that I'll pursue, and I know I'll be effective because I've done them before. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we want to hear from Mr. Schwab.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody this evening. There's a lot that we have to be proud of as Washingtonians. And one thing we should all be very proud of is the current state of our Office of Attorney General. We are recognized across the country as one of the premier state AG offices anywhere in the country, taking on the most difficult issues successfully and effectively. And that doesn't happen without great leadership. There is a team of extraordinarily talented lawyers and law professionals working every day for us as citizens in DC. And lots of that happens only because we have an extraordinary leader in Carl Racine. I'm very proud that our first elected Attorney General, Carl Racine, has endorsed me, as has the prior AG, the last appointed AG, Irv Nathan. Two men who probably know better than anybody in the city what it takes to be able to do this job, this incredibly difficult, complicated job, and be ready to do it on day one. The breadth of lawyering experience that is required to execute judgment, to be able to make hard calls in complex matters, years of leadership, leading large teams of lawyers and organizations and managing resources and budgets, bringing an independence and a fresh eye to things. Being a fair election candidate is important when it comes to being independent, and knowing that the next Attorney General of this city is going to be beholden to no one when he has to make hard decisions, because let's face it, this is a hard job. There are always going to be multiple points of view on every issue. And it wouldn't get to the AG to have to make a decision if there weren't really good arguments on both sides. I'm looking to take what I've been doing for the last nearly 30 years, something I'm passionate about, something I'm good at, and put it in service of a city I love. I'm a third-generation Washingtonian. My three daughters are fourth-generation Washingtonians, and I want to step up and fight for the city and the people who live in this city every day as your next AG. And I hope I'll earn your support and your vote. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Ryan Jones, you get the last word.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Your participation is essential in determining a change the city desperately needs. I'm Ryan Jones. I'm running for Attorney General, and I want your vote. I want to be your attorney. I want to be a cog in the wheel that creates change that the district needs and send us in a better direction. The district is in need of a course correction to allow the government to meet residents where they are and what they need most. So we need a new vision. We need new people. We need new ideas. We're watching the world go through tumultuous times with the market that's crashing, with environment that's reaching a fever pitch. We're looking at gun violence spiking. These are all on people's watches that are currently in power. And we need to have new vision to step up to the plate and try to cure these issues. 2020 forced me into this race. I watched what happened, and we watched disparities grow. We watched people lose their lives right in front of our eyes. And that motivated me to step to the plate and say, we need to do something better. We need to have the power of this office, change the way government works, and make it work for the people. Hold the government accountable against itself when it's not doing what's necessary. This is a brave thing, it's a sacrifice for me, and it's a sacrifice for my colleagues. I recognize that they can step to the plate and do a very capable job. I believe in myself, and we would all be on a steep learning curve to take on the challenges of this office, learn a system to manage, to do things differently than how we've done them before in the past. But I think passion matters. I think a moral compass matters. And I'm telling you, I have the passion and the moral compass to do what's right, to bring justice to the folks that need it the most, to make them feel the warmth of a government that they haven't felt in many years, to try to rewire a system to empower people. That's why I'm running. I know it needs to be done. I'm talking about creating a task force that reevaluates the DC code, talking about creating an expungement clinic every day to give people an opportunity to get back out there and do meaningful things with their hands, talking about creating a wills and trust clinic that allows people to pass down wealth and protect them in their lifetime so that they can have a functional life in this society. And expanding public advocacy. People need to know that there's someone that they can turn to have their rights advocated for. And I'm that person. I started a law firm to do just that. And I plan to just charge up the Office of Attorney General in a direction where it helps more people. June 21st, we are going to elect a new Attorney General in a crucial time period of all of our lives. And this decision will have a massive effect on where we go from not right now, but years to come. And I believe I'm the person that will get us there.
Okay, thank you very much. And so all the candidates have spoken. I think it was a very interesting discussion tonight. Debate, I would not say, because y'all seem to agree on everything, but nevertheless, interesting finding out where people are. You know, in this office, many offices, you sort of know who the candidates are, but with the Attorney General's office, they're attorneys, I guess. And frankly, I had not heard of any of them before this particular campaign. And so this was the second time I actually did this one. I think it's probably my last time doing this Attorney General's debate. But nevertheless, interesting ideas, interesting men, people who seem to love the District of Columbia. And so it's been an interesting debate tonight. We'd like to thank all of you for coming on board. I think I saw like a couple hundred people were watching this from somewhere. And we'd like to say to all of you, thank you for watching and good evening.
Sam, I'm going to say one little thing on behalf of the DC Affairs community. I wanted to thank you especially for being our lead moderator. I want to thank our other moderators and our panelists. I wanted to ask everybody out there on YouTube land, all you YouTubers and Zoomers, to clap. You guys did a fantastic job, and we're really putting you through the paces. I think maybe tonight's questions were probably more incisive than others, but that's just, I'm just kind of proud of our members in our community and members of the bar. I also want to thank the Anacostia Coordinating Council for all of your work as a co-sponsor with us, and wish all of you a very nice and healthy, a safe and healthy evening. Thank you.
And with that, we will formally close out